In the 23rd chapter of Matthew, we read these words. Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, "The teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. So you must obey them and do everything they tell you. But do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach. They tie up heavy loads and put them on a man's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them. Everything they do is done for men to see. They make their phylacteries wide and the tassels on their garments long. They love the place of honor at banquets and the most important seats in the synagogues. They love to be greeted in the marketplace and to have people call them rabbi. But you are not to be called rabbi, for you have only one master, and you are all brothers. Do not call anyone on earth Father. You have one Father, he is in heaven. Nor are you to be called teacher, for you have one teacher, the Christ. The greatest among you will be your servant. For whoever exalts himself will be humbled. Whoever humbles himself will be exalted." These are the words from the Lord in the house of the Lord. Joshua got promoted to take the people into the promised land. It wasn't Moses' brother Aaron who had been his faithful sidekick the whole way through the wilderness, but rather Joshua got the good job. And he was tasked to get across the Jordan River at flood stage. And God said to him, just simply go out and walk in the river and it'll stop. And he did. And it did. Oh, to have that kind of faith. Especially if you can't swim. Joshua did what God called upon him to do. And that's been the story of the whole trip through the wilderness, is that the Israelites were finally willing to do what God called upon them to do. They resisted it. They fought it pretty hard. They tried not to do it. They begged to go back to slavery. They begged to be set free from freedom. And sometimes we get into the same boat. We get to the point where, boy, it would be easier if we could just go back and do it the same old way. We don't have to do anything new. We don't need any new challenges. And yet that's what being Christian is all about. It's about new challenges. It's about new things that are going to happen. Jesus said to those who would listen to him, don't be like the Pharisees. Don't sit in the high places. You have to obey the rulers. If they sit in the seat of law, which is Moses' seat, you have to obey them. And we're in that same boat. We have to obey the people who have law on their side. But we don't have to be like them. And we see this going on in our news all the time of people who feel entitled to everything simply because they've been exalted because of some talent they have shown or some wonderful deed they have done. And then we find out how the other side of the coin looks. And Christ says, don't be like that. The greatest among you will be humbled. It's a long fall from the very top of the mountain to the valley below. And God doesn't want us to take that trip. He wants us to stay up on the mountain. He wants us to stay exalted. He wants us to stay part of that which is wonderful, not that which is terrible. And he expects us to. He said, don't do it so that man can see it. We have a sort of an unofficial policy here. We don't do a lot of advertising because we know what we're doing. And the people who need to know what we're doing. We don't need to broadcast it everywhere. Our food pantry is up about 35 to 40% over what it was last year at the same time. So maybe it's a good thing that we don't advertise because we don't need... No, it'd be wonderful if we were up 100% because you people would take care of them. But we don't need to run ads to get more people to come. We simply have to make sure that when they arrive, they get what is needed. We have to be able to touch them in the name of Christ so that they understand we're not giving them food alone, but rather we're touching with Christ's mercy, with every box, every bag, every smile. You'd be surprised, if you haven't been there, you'd be surprised the smiles that go on in that place and the tears as people get back in the cars. We don't need to advertise so that other people know how wonderful we are. Because as soon as we become wonderful, we expose ourselves to falling flat on our face. Because without God's support, without His mercy, without His drive, without His coverance of what we do, we can't possibly succeed. And that's all He asks of us. Jesus said to those who would listen to Him, don't get the best seat. There's even a passage that says, don't sit at the head table at the wedding because they might send you out the door. Well, out to the back 40 anyway. But rather take the place of humble so that you can be lifted up. You can be glorified. You can be raised up in the name of Christ. So what He asks of us is to be selfless. We shouldn't do things for ourselves. We should look for someone else to do it for. And I don't mean we concentrate on the food pantry because it's a big deal. It's one of our better ministries. It's one of our biggest ministries. It's what we've made a commitment to that lasts. But what's more important, what's really more important than the food pantry is the attitude of the people who support the food pantry. And I dare say that we've all gone through a change in attitude. We thought we were being wonderful when we had a 10 by 10 room and let people get something out of it. And then we realized that if we're going to do what Christ asks us to do, we have to make a commitment. It isn't the people coming to us, but it's us. If we're going to do what Christ asks us to do, we have to make a commitment to everyone around us. Not just food pantry, but everyone who looks to come into our door. You, notice I'm pointing at everybody. I'm not picking you out. I'm not separating. But you're responsible for growing this church. Not me. I'm just sitting in Moses' seat, so you got to do what I tell you to do. That'll happen, I know. No, really, if you want this church to be something special, you have to make it special. And you have, because you've come Sunday after Sunday after Sunday. And I'm going to ask you, how many people here were invited by a friend to come to church here? Yeah, see, that's why you're here. How many people walked into the rummage sale and said, oh, hey, this is kind of fun. Maybe we ought to try the whole thing out. You see, Christ comes to us in so many different places, so many different ways. And what we have to remember is that we have to be part of it every time He shows up. We can't take time off. We have to be His messenger all the time because He's here all the time. And you have to smile at friends, smile at strangers, smile at rude people. You always smile because then they wonder what you're getting away with. But most of all, we have to do it with a heart for the love of Christ. For too often we do things because it's the season to do it. It's the time to do it. It wasn't any other reason not to do it, but when we ought to be doing it because this is an expression of our love for Christ. We're going to have a meeting after a while. It should be an expression of our love for Christ. We're going to have a breakfast next Saturday, and the men will gather together. And in that time together, there ought to be an expression of Christ's love. When we've packed the boxes, when we fill up the Christmas boxes, when we have Thanksgiving, I can go on. We got a few. I better not. But we have to understand that it isn't any one thing that embraces Christ's love. It's everything. And we can't take the day off. We can't take the time off because He doesn't take time off from loving us. So if we know nothing else this morning, if we can only take the cup and the bread and be renewed, refreshed, reminded, possible reborn in the love of Christ. I would ask you to turn to page 15 in your hymnal.